All right. Thank
Okay, you're recording. Have a good meeting.
All right.
Thank you, Ann.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right. This is the Open Space Committee meeting. At this point, we obviously don't have a quorum. We have only one member, who's me, and Steve Sobol. So I'm still hoping that Kevin Mandeville may call in. He lost his Wi-Fi in the storm, he said, and would keep trying. And Maureen Manasian said she might be able to call in sometime, maybe 15, 20 minutes into the meeting. Nicole cannot be on today. She had something come up. She is able to make it. So the first thing we were going to do was review the agenda. The only thing I wanted to add to that Steve, you and I have already been talking about, is that Shared Streets and Spaces grant. I think I picked, where did I see that? Oh, in the Buzz Around Bridgewater.
Okay.
Are you on that email list? Yeah, it's just a local online newsletter, and they had it in there. They had the announcement of the grants in there. So I just looked at it, and when I saw it, I thought, oh, well, this sounds interesting.
Maybe it is a little bit different, but it sounded similar to what I signed off on.
Oh, okay, yeah, who knows? Maybe it is. But it was basically the purpose of it was to give towns the opportunity to do COVID-related improvements to improve public access and public safety, outdoor activities. Like it sounded like even and you could either apply nonprofits and community groups had one grant program, and then the municipalities had another. And I think the municipalities one was called the streets and Shared Streets and Spaces. And I think there was another name for a nonprofit one. And like outdoor restaurant space was one of the things they specifically mentioned. So what had occurred to me is I just thought, well, gee, is there something we might look for in terms of signs for parks? We've been talking about that. We want to get people outside using something now during COVID when they need to be enjoying outdoor spaces, then maybe we could do something, think about trying to do that. If the deadline was today, obviously not. I'll need to go back and look at that too.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at the deadline on the link you sent me, because when did they post that in that newsletter?
Well, Buzz Around Bridgewater is just it's a weekly thing. And this was the first time I saw it. I just read it today. I think it comes out on Thursdays and Mondays. It's got all sorts of town and local business and nonprofit information. So yeah, I didn't see this posted anywhere else, but I wouldn't expect to actually. I would not. Anyway, so I just thought, it would require a pretty quick turnaround. I saw something about September, I thought, but that could have been when they want to get all the money spent by even. I'm not sure. I didn't read it carefully. I'm not sure that we can get anything done that quickly anyway as a committee, because we're having trouble getting people to come to meetings. So, the other thing I wanted to mention to you is you and I had just talked about possible signage, that might be something we could get going on fairly quickly. It seems like it's a good idea that it's one of the things that appears in every one of the surveys that the town has done over however many years. With every study, people always say, we don't know where these places are. We don't, we don't have access to them. We don't. And we went to the site. We had that site visit at Titicut last week. You had just been. It was me and Maureen, and then two members of the public came. Fran Jeffries. I don't know if you've met Fran. She's quite active in civic things, and Shirley Krasinski. And they were both involved with NRTB years ago too. And so we walked around there, and we were pretty surprised with what good shape those trails are, and there were people there working on it. I think I mentioned that to you. They were working on that parking area.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were putting, it's an Eagle Scout project. So the,
Oh,
okay,
in
I
the
guess I didn't.
parking, near the parking lot?
Yeah, there
Okay.
was a man there with a front loader plowing it that day, like leveling it.
Yep.
And then when we were leaving, there was a father and a son who were starting to shovel gravel or something. And they said this was an Eagle Scout project where they had slightly expanded that parking area and were leveling it and then putting some kind of gravel top on it. And someone else, I forget who told me that there's a pretty active group of Boy Scouts that go out there, that they,
Mhm.
and I think the man who was doing the plowing actually, or doing the front loading, he lives down the street, and I think he's quite involved with that part. So it seemed like there's quite a lot of citizen caretaking going on there as it is now.
That's what it seems like out there, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, so are those your kids?
Hmm?
Are those your kids in the background?
Yeah, I gotta quiet them down.
No, that's all right. No.
I do, because I can't hear you.
All right.
I need you to be quiet. So,
That's such a beautiful backdrop you have there. I love it. So did you have to do a green screen?
yeah.
You did, yeah, okay. That sounded complicated.
Yeah, I mean, back to the signage, the signage has always, in my experience, been the biggest part. Because then you introduce people to the area. They want to take some responsibility out there and be a part of it.
Yep.
And with the signage, it's really just coming up with the funds, whether it's through public fundraisers, grant money. As things start to open up, I think there's going to be an increased focus on the outdoor areas.
Yeah,
And then it comes down to design and coming up with a streamlined design. Now, whether we put that out, obviously anything will have to be approved by the town manager. But as far as coming up with the design for colors and that stuff, because we want it to all be exactly the same
yeah.
and just flow in each park so that people know what to look for when they show up.
We
Just
need to
for
figure out,
consistency.
yeah, we need to figure out what we want to call these areas too. Because are they conservation areas? Are they parks? I went out to Tuckerwood yesterday. I was just driving home from C.N. Smith Farm, and I went by. Have you ever been there? It's right on High Street, and there's two signs at the driveway entrance, and they say Town of Bridgewater Conservation Area. And I know when I see signs like that, I've seen them in Halifax and Hanson and different places. I'm never really sure what it means. Does it mean the public can go in and do what they want, or does it mean that it's it's preserved in some way?
So conservation areas in general fall under Article 97.
Okay.
So if you look up Article 97, they have a set of regulations that go along with conservation owned property. So on those pieces of property, there's certain activities that are allowed and that are strictly forbade. And for the purpose of recreation in conservation areas, passive recreation is allowed. Now, I've had discussions with EOEA probably for 15 years regarding the semantics and splitting hairs over what exactly is passive recreation.
Yeah.
Because it really is a gray area. It really depends on the erosion potential of the site. It depends on how valuable the resources on the site are, because some conservation areas don't even have wetland resource areas on them. So they're being preserved for scenic vistas and aesthetics and specifically for trails. And then you have other pieces that are put aside for strictly preservation. So maybe a small walking path, but mainly to preserve the surrounding buffer zones around the actual wetland resource areas.
Mm-hmm.
So parcels are bought up for all different various reasons. But they all have to fall, if they're going to be owned by the Conservation Commission and overseen by the Conservation Commission, they have to fall under Article 97.
Okay.
And, that typically means like a baseline study needs to be done. And a baseline what that does is it's a study that goes out and it surveys the entire property from finding out historical resources on site, aesthetic resources on site, natural resources on site, and documenting all those things. And then as you move forward, those standards need to be maintained. So each conservation area could have a particular set of regulations in which we're governing it with, essentially.
Pertaining specifically to them, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so some of them are more able to sustain more different varied types of active passive recreation, such as, trails or mountain biking, or, because I look at Borderland State Park as sort of a unique park in the sense that it's preserved for wetland resource areas. It's got some active recreation out there in the form of mountain biking on aggressive trails. It's got disc golf out there, which is a passive recreation / active recreation, depending on who you ask. Then they've got the historical resources of all the Oliver Ames stuff that's going on out there, and all the buildings. So there's a lot of different things that can be preserved. Now, that's why sometimes land trusts get involved, and then they have their own set of they have their own vision of what they do with these properties. And then when it comes down to it, if they're going to get around a wetland that's on their land trust property, then they simply need to go by wetland regulations as opposed to, the other regulation. Now, historical commission can come into play, of course, as well. It depends on the property. They truly are all a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, okay. But one thing I did notice at both at Titicut, I went to Ironworks on Sunday morning. I walked down there. Have you seen Ironworks?
I've been there. I went there in the winter when it was completely no leaves, quiet, cold.
Yeah, right. There really is pretty good signage there too. It's old, it's been,
Steve Black
there for a long time. Yeah, it's kind of discolored, but it's there, and I was surprised. But the other thing that's not there is there's no indication of parking. There's that big parking lot in front of the Club 49 and the town garage, but it's not clear who can park there. There's no sign that says parking for Ironworks Park anywhere. And I assume that's probably by design, that somebody must have tried to do that in the past.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think I may invite Steve Black to one of our committee meetings and let him give us some more background on that. I actually invited him to be on our committee, but he declined. So, but I'd like to find out more about, I'm sure he knows a lot more about that. But again, there are good signs there. It's what you don't know is where to park, and if you're going by in a car, the little sign on High Street that says Ironworks Conservation Areas is kind of obscured by trees right now, when the leaves are out. So it's a nice park, and it just needs to be publicized and parking made more readily available. And it may already be available, it's just not clear. And it looked like it hadn't really had any tree clearing this year because of Earth Day being canceled because of COVID, because there was some announcement up there that there was going to be some kind of a clearing. So between that part, between Ironworks, seeing that really looks pretty well cared for, not abandoned. Same thing with Titicut. And from what I could see when I went out to Tuckerwood yesterday, there's a kiosk there with pretty good signage, in terms of rules, regulation, a map. I did not go any further than the parking lot. There were 2 cars parked there, so there is a road and it's accessible. So that one has some signage too. So really, it seems like from what I've seen so far, Styles and Hart is the one that's most in need of immediate work.
It's in need of a
and then Wyman,
major facelift.
Yes, yeah. And then Wyman Meadows, of course, which I know the recommendation from that parks assessment is that one's really not worth pursuing. It's just not in a place very accessible. But anyway, we'll talk about that later.
It might be worth it to take the assessment back out to all the parks and in a checklist format, see what is become even bigger priorities.
Yeah,
And maybe reclassifying and reordering
Yeah.
what is going to take the least amount of work to bring up to standard, or what we want as our standard, and then what is going to take the most. And, of course, with Styles and Heart being sort of set aside as that big piece that's tied so much into the, downtown economy and
yeah,
those things, that's going to get the most attention and probably the most volunteership, I would argue.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
It also seems to have quite a bit of political support. Did Bill Wood get elected on Saturday? I didn't notice.
I do not know.
Okay, well, he's a big advocate, of Styles and Heart. I know there was something on Facebook, Bridgewater residents' Facebook page. He made a big pitch for Styles and Heart and what he'd done for it and how interested he was in it, et cetera, et cetera. So if he was elected, I'm sure he's going to be a big voice for it too. So it does sound like between him and Mike,
That'd be good.
interested in it. So yeah, so we may have some support there, but that
Because
one,
once you get like a case study in place, then it's easier to implement everywhere else.
yeah,
And maybe that's where we take advantage of Titicate or one of these other parks, bring it up to the vision level that we see, and really publicize it, take pictures, and say this is what we see in the future for all the parks.
mhm,
Because that one would be the easiest to bring up to a standard where we could really show it off and showcase it. It's also where we offer camping and some of the other active recreation, passive recreation activities that are allowed on the areas that are protected in town. So,
yeah,
I think when I get back to the office, which is starting Monday, I'm going to be probably doing a lot of re-inventory and checking through that assessment, and coming up with some notes and potential changes, maybe some edits. Because, things like that need to be done every few years, even if they're not addressed at all.
Yeah.
Especially if they're not addressed at all, because then you have to wonder if you kind of just got to start over.
Yeah.
Because are we too far removed from that assessment that everything's completely invalid? So it's a good place to start, and seeing what's close and seeing what's not. And then, we can also gear our volunteers hopefully towards that, saying, we need, volunteers for this type of work over here, but heavy lifting and heavy machinery and chainsaws and everything else, I need you guys to focus up more on Styles and Heart.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one thing I did notice when I was looking at the signs, I think both at Ironworks and Tuckerwood, they have the Bay Circuit Trail has a particular logo, and also the Nunkesik Greenway. Particularly, you've probably seen the Nunkesik for sure. And so both of those have their logos on the signs that are up there. So I was glad to see that, because I thought, well, they've already got their look. They've decided on a design, and just putting that on whatever signage we have makes the connections.
Oh yeah,
already.
no, for sure. I mean,
Really helpful.
it was the same thing on that. I don't know if you attended that stewardship Zoom meeting we had going with the Appalachian Mountain Club. And
Yes, I did. Yep.
they were talking about their signage, and they're consistent. That's a good model to follow with Nunkesik Greenway and Bay Circuit Trail. We have the contacts within those entities to be able to reach out to be like, how did you come up with the design?
Yeah.
Who did you use? Maybe we can tack on there. And then in October, if everything goes according to plan, the Dan Brownman, who's big with the Bay Circuit Trail, will be hopefully doing a presentation that was earmarked for April.
Oh, who is it? Who's Dan Brown?
Dan Brownman,
Browman?
BRIELMANN. I may have completely botched that, but he's a big time player with the Bay Circuit Trail.
Oh,
He does a ton of work. He does, I even want to say he's the guy, or Kitty's introduced me to all these people. Kitty Doherty.
yeah.
And she's big with the Nuckatessa Greenway. So she
Yeah, oh, yeah.
she would be a great resource to talk about signage. She's already on top of the signage issue. She knows how important it is with her vast experience working within this sector. So she'll be a good one to rely on moving forward. But, now it's just kind of a waiting game to see when people are going to feel comfortable to get back out there and do the work and organize them and send them out.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but we could do a lot, trying to get design things worked out before we actually have anything to put on the ground too. So I thought I had taken a picture of that. The Ironworks sign is the one that's out in the street is very old. It looks like it's probably been there for a long, long time. And small and no design whatsoever. I mean, it's just, it's just the words. And
Okay.
so that one would be, it seems like if we want, there should be something out there with the same kind of information, like about the Nunkatessa Greenway and Bay Circuit Trail out on the street, so that people recognize that. And then the other comment that, well, I heard this from the two people who came out to the Titicut walk too, is just that, again, there's a sign there it says Titicut, and then you can see the kiosk, but again, it's really hard to know that you don't know it's a city park. It's like if you're going down that street, same thing with Carver Pond. If you don't know it's there, you can just drive right by, and it'd be nice to have some kind of a sign on the street so it can be viewed by passing cars. It doesn't have to have all the information on all, about the rules and all that stuff, but just so that people going by.
Don't miss
someone I know. Yeah. Don't miss it. Someone I know who lives within a half a mile of Carver Pond. She's lived here close to 10 years. During COVID, she just told me, she said, "Oh, we found the most wonderful spot. It's just Carver Pond. It's this wonderful park." And I said, where have you been? I was like, yeah, but it doesn't have a sign right out there where she could see it going by in her car. And she had seen cars parked there, and I forget what she said. She thought they were for or something, just the neighbors or something, and so just didn't recognize it as a park, and so.
Yeah, I mean, parking seems to be a big issue at most all the areas.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough nut to crack.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to find out from Steve Black, because at Ironworks, it just doesn't seem like it should be. That there's this place called the 49ers Club. It looks like some kind of a restaurant, bar, I don't know, but it's a big old house with kind of an outdoor eating area. But it seems to me that there's a lot of parking there for it. I don't know how crowded that place gets, but I wouldn't think it's going to be crowded at the same time as a park anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a bar and they're open at night, I mean, people aren't going to be going into Ironworks Park then. So I want to find out from Steve what the story is, because that seems like one where there's parking that's just right there and it's just not marked. And I'm sure there's a story behind that, but it seems like something we ought to try to work on. So, all right. Well, it doesn't look like anybody else is going to be joining us, so I don't want to take your time. There's no point in going over the tutorial on Oliver for just me. Is there anything else that how's Michael doing? I told Katie that I didn't expect him to be on these calls. At some point, if he wants to be, he can be. But I assume you talk with him regularly. If you have any indication of where he's headed with any of this open space stuff, or how high a priority one thing or another is, you can keep us informed.
Right now, the conversations I have with him regarding open space are trying to close out the final pieces of the Stiles and Hart acquisition on
Okay.
Broad Street.
Yeah.
Trying to close that down. We had to rush to get some documentation over to the granting program late last week, early this week. But I imagine once I'm back in the office, so on Monday, I will be there Monday through Friday all day. And then it's like a turnover, so it's a staggered shift. So 1 week, like this current week, the assistant town planner and the executive assistant are there. Next week, I'll be in there with the office administrator. So we're just flip-flopping for the month of July. I imagine that we're going to start picking up conversations between departments that weren't happening as frequently during this time down, as we sort of approach whatever the new normal is.
Yeah.
We're just kind of going with the flow at this point. We're trying to get everything done that's up against timelines and deadlines. So not to say that this isn't important. It's right there just waiting for once we get these final things, because it all is coinciding with the end of the fiscal year right essentially now, yesterday. So, today being July 1st, it starts the new fiscal year. So, I mean, it's been a little hectic, I'm sure, at Michael's office as the year flips. So I imagine once he gets a little cooled down with budget and whatnot, he's going to be able to really spread his wings again and offer that guidance to the different departments as we, like I said, as we approach the new normal.
Okay. I think what I'll do is set up a site visit at Tuckerwood next time. I think what I'll try to do is just pick a Wednesday 2 weeks from now. I don't know what that is. It must be the 14th. Yeah, 15th. And
yep.
I won't notice it yet. I'll send it around, see who can make it. I mean, we'll just see who can.
That's one I haven't walked through yet. So I want to get out there and check that one out. So. Yeah.
I think what I'll do is I'll keep doing the site visits separate from the meetings, because it's so hard getting people to attend that I don't want to have too many things going on in one day. Better to split it up and see who can make one thing and maybe not make the other. So, I'll try to do a site visit on June 15th, and then I may try. I don't know. I'll see about. I just want to ask Nicole, like, her schedule's pretty crazy because she's got 2 kids at home and she's still working, and so. Yeah.
And I feel like everyone's just starting to get back into the office right about now. The last couple of weeks, as the private sector and public sector have both started to go back, it's almost like a resettling in period. It's kind of bizarre. It was like a 1 to 2 week getting used to working from home period when we first got out, and then now it's like it's going to take a week or 2 just to get used to being back in the office every day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and what's been piling up, and what are your priorities now, and it's
I
not
mean,
like we know where we're headed either. You don't have your final budget numbers, I'm sure, yet. I mean, do you know what kind of cuts are coming up for?
I just know that I'm not likely to get a trail steward. That'll probably fall on me, which is fine. And I think as far as permitting goes, we cleared an awful lot of stuff off our last agenda. So based on historic permitting in town, it's going to be pretty steady, but pretty slow. And the other big thing that's on my horizon is the MS4. So all the stormwater and drainage and illicit discharges, and we don't want what happened in Norwood happening in Bridgewater. So.
Is that the flooding they just had, you mean?
The flooding at the hospital, yeah.
Yeah.
So we got to address our drainage, and it's got an awful lot to do with stormwater, as people learned very quickly in the span of a few hours. Yeah,
that's funny. I was sitting out on my porch about 2 hours ago when we got that downpour here, and it would stop and then it would start up again. And I was thinking, oh, So we don't need 5 inches of rain here, you know.
Yeah, it's been bizarre. I mean, these storms are, you know, soaking us, but they're not very high energy storms. There's not a lot of thunder and lightning associated with them. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for being on. I wouldn't want to talk to myself for an hour. That was all right. I thought about canceling this, but that seemed more trouble than it was worth. And anyway, it's worthwhile for me to talk to you, get your perspective.
Sure. Anytime. I'm around.
Thank you.
No problem, Eileen. Thank you.
Bye.